Okay, so thanks for turning up. So I'm going to talk about so there are, from the face-to-face meeting, there are quite a few things that were noticed about the sessions proposal. Most of them are incredibly small things, wordsmithing, spelling mistakes, commas, and so on. I'm not going to deal with any of those today because I don't think it's controversial. We'll just get them done by the next meeting. There were two things that have the potential to cause controversy, are new bits of text that we need to craft, and I want to get them right for the next meeting. So the reason for this meeting is to socialize Howard's and I initial approach for these, to see if we're on the right lines or if we've just completely misunderstood or gone too far or not far enough. So there, first one I'm going to talk about is something to do with info-env. So the info-env thing is basically nothing to do with the sessions ticket. We don't care as sessions whether it exists or doesn't exist. But it is somewhat related because the sessions proposal wants info objects to be accessible, as in creatable and settable and modifiable and so on, before session init, which could be before MPI init and therefore is outside of when you usually can do this stuff. So MPI info-env is an info object, so okay, maybe it's sort of related. So what we're planning to do is put in these two sentences here. So we already say in the introduction to the sessions process model thing, we already say MPI com world is not valid for use as a communicator. Right, that's already existing text. We're just going to do exactly the same thing for the info-env object. MPI info-env is not valid for use as an info object when using the sessions model. That's all we want to say. We don't care about this thing. If you want to use it, that's the next sentence. As described in section, whatever that is, MPI must be initialized using the world process model to use this info object. Right? So if you want to use it, that's fine. Just call MPI init or init thread, and it will be accessible exactly the same way as it is in MPI 3.1. There's no difference. So that's the least controversial and minimum change that we can make. I think that captures at least what Howard and I want to say here, or rather want not to say. Does anybody have any comments on that? Is that suitable? Does that capture what for those that were at the meeting, does that capture what you heard the criticism being, and do you agree or disagree or whatever?
So what is the plan for filling in the to-do? Once I'm done with my thing. So
I think to do add blurb referencing thing. I don't know what that pull request is.
I assume that's the one that I'm presenting about adding the ability to create MPI info-env separately.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's what that is.
So I think the thing to do there is to wait and see if your thing actually flies or whether it's shot down in flames at some point in the near future. I think I would probably put absolutely nothing in here about that, because either your ticket will fly and it will sort itself out, or it won't. And it doesn't matter as far as sessions is concerned, right? If you add a new function that you called before MPI init, before MPI is initialized, that's great. We'll add it to our list. We've got a table of such things, so we'll just add that. But that's not going to be a big bit of text. It might add a new entry into our table of all the functions that could be called before MPI is initialized. But I don't think it should be here.
And my ticket's taking care of that part.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess it's not taking care of it if you're reformatting the table.
Yeah, there's a merge conflict, obviously, between where you're going to put that out. If sessions goes in first and you're modifying after sessions, you add it to the table. If it's in fourth, then you modify the current incomplete list, chapter 12, wherever it came from. If they go in at the same time, then we argue over who's going to make the change.
All right, that sounds good.
Okay, so we'll just remove that comment.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I kind of like to have those in there so it's helpful, but okay, sure.
So
you can actually, I think, edit it directly and remove it. But...
I am doing so, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so somebody else was trying to talk, sorry.
Yeah, I had a quick question. So if Wesley's ticket does go in, though, does that require you to initialize the full world model? I mean, or do you still have to do that?
No,
No.
Okay.
No, yeah, I was just going to say, no, it doesn't require that at all. It's completely independent of the process model at all. And you're just creating a kind of standalone info object.
Okay, so then the latter part of that sentence would be modified, right?
Well, not exactly, because what you create with the function I'm proposing is not MPI info m. It's something that looks and feels and acts like MPI info m, but it is not the symbol MPI info m. So that is still correct.
Okay.
It might be nice to put in advice to users or something here, just to say, you know, this thing that is very similar is available here, but it's not required. We can kind of decide whether we want to do that or not, but that could be a separate thing later.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's almost you know, it's an errata, something that could be done in tidy up of the document in 4.1, or it's something you could do in your ticket, Wesley, or something we could do in this one. I think it's not controversial, and it's not going to. I think that's yeah.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Throwing that in as an errata or whatever, especially if it's an advice, is totally fine.
Okay. Good. I think that then convinces me that we're on the right lines with that. We will probably just leave that alone. I will probably present it in any future virtual meeting to do with sessions, assuming we have a second one, which we may or may not do so. So you may see this again, and others may see it. And at some point, obviously, we'll send out some thing to the forum list, email list, and I'll include this as our proposed change for this. Okay, so that's that one. So, and then what have we got? So yes, there's this one. So there's the other one that I want to discuss is adding some more information about the process sets. In particular, there was a comment about the MPI sessions get num p sets function, which gets the number of p sets that are currently available, clue is in the name. So again, a point was raised about what is and is not allowed in terms of that number. So we had written before that the number of process sets was allowed to increase, but it was not allowed to decrease in subsequent calls to that function. That was to allow things like runtimes to create process sets. You know, names could come into existence and become meaningful during the execution of an application, and we didn't want to prevent MPI from exposing those names to the user, but we also want to avoid the race condition of, you know, effectively getting told there are 3 process sets and then trying to enumerate them, and you try and index the third one and it's gone away by the time you get there. So it can't decrease. But it was pointed out that we didn't actually say that they couldn't be mutated within that number, as long as the number was at least as big as it was before. We didn't say that the third one will always be what it was before. So if the third one was ocean before, it should always be ocean forevermore. You know, if I ask again how many are there, it will certainly say at least 3. But if I asked for the third one, I should always get ocean, because otherwise I get race conditions, non-determinism, bad things, you know, so on. So we looked at some text elsewhere where this is already done. There's precedent in the tools working group because they do the same sort of thing with the C vars and P vars. It's possible for the number of those to increase during the execution, but if you ever get told that the nth one is a particular variable, then it is that variable for all time until you you know, do MPI finalize and start again. For that whole job, it is the same thing. Even if it becomes stale, even if it becomes not useful anymore, the position is not it's not deleted and it's not replaced by something else. So that's what we're trying to do. The text we've actually come up with is to replace what we had before with this function is used to query the runtime for the number of available process sets in which the calling MPI process is a member. That's the same as before. And then an MPI implementation is allowed to increase the number of available process sets during the execution of an MPI application when new process sets become available. That's a paraphrasing of the equivalent sentence from the tools working group, as are all of the rest. However, MPI implementations are not allowed to change the index of a particular process set name or to delete a process set name once it's been added. When a process set becomes invalid, for example, when some processes become unreachable due to system faults, subsequent usage of the process set name should return an appropriate error code. And then I've written an example here which isn't in the tools working group, the tools chapter thing, just because, when should this error code be returned? This could be an advice to users or an advice to somebody, I don't really mind. Currently it's normative text. So for example, creating an MPI group from such a process set might succeed because it is a local operation, but creating an MPI com from that group and attempting collective communication should raise an error handler. I don't know whether that's the right phrase. Wesley, you can help me out there. Is it raise an error or activate an error handler, or what's the phrase I should use there?
Yeah, I'm looking that up right now because you've kind of done two different things here on the two different lines. So I'll make a comment and say whatever the right thing is later.
So barring wordsmithing of getting the right phrase, is that the right sort of thing for those that were at the meeting? Does that capture what was mentioned at the meeting, and for the others? Do you agree with that? Does that make sense to you? Should I change the wording? Should I add stuff, take stuff out?
Fine.
Okay. So that was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. I thought.
Wait. So do we use the word system faults anywhere in the standard right now?
That's probably the answer to that is going to be no. Yeah, well, I don't suppose we actually say what unreachable means either, but then we're sort of talking about a new area here. Again, Wesley, you might be the one to
yeah, I'm looking for that too.
Figure out what we mean to say there. I sort of want to give an example. In the tools working group, it says something about the new variables can become available in the available sentence above. It says when they become official through dynamic loading. In that invalid sentence, they might become invalid through dynamic unloading. Right, so here's an example of how this might occur. I sort of wanted to comply with that and do something saying, what do we mean by it becomes invalid? I think it must mean something like, I can't use it to make a communicator that works. That's the by definition, that's what I mean by invalid process set. Otherwise, what do I mean by invalid? So I think I'd like to say something here. I don't really mind if we actually strike the for example though in that sentence. If we just went from when a process set becomes invalid, subsequent usage of a process set name should return an appropriate error code. I'm happy with that sentence. It's just it doesn't explain when it becomes invalid or what we mean by invalid when applied to a process set. So I'd like to hear a little bit more information. We can come up with a suitable phrase.
So, are you guys sure you want to designate here that you cannot delete a process set name? I can understand making the index of it sort of no future use, because you could allocate some space and you could delete an index out of it, and then in the future you just go, that thing's invalid because there's no information there. But seeing that you can never delete a process set, what are the ramifications for a really long-running MPI process that, say, has a lot of faults?
Yeah, so Martin brought this up, this exact point up, and this is the interface that we've got right now, and it's also, if you wrote perfectly bad tools interface program, you would get into exactly the same situation. I can't get rid of a control variable or a performance variable. If I keep using new ones, I'm actually going to run out of memory for the list. We don't create tools variables very often. At the moment, we don't create process sets very often either. Actually, we don't create any of them. Right? How frequently are you going to create new process set names? We don't know yet. Right? So this follows the current.
Good morning, Southwest Vector. So those signals are 8 number 21 area. So those do travel.
Sorry, I'm having a real hard time hearing you, Dan. Okay, got better. Great. Go ahead.
I was having difficulty hearing myself. Never mind. So yeah, I think that there is that is a flaw in the interface. It is a flaw that is shared by a bunch of other things. This is sort of the nature of how we do iterators in MPI. You know, we don't get an iterator handle which I can then throw away and get another one. It's basically global state. This is just the way that we express iterate MPI, and it's terrible. But this is the precedent that we've. When I was thinking about this actually earlier today, I was thinking that a future change could introduce a function like basically a reset function or a prune function of, you know, I am now at the point where I can cope with pruning this list. So I could do MPI session pset prune, for example, or prune psets. And if I then asked how many, the number could be smaller than the previous time I asked, because it's got rid of all the ones that don't make any sense anymore. Potentially, it could prune it all the way down to the 2 mandatory ones, but you know what I would expect it to do is prune it down to the ones that still make sense. So if there were
all I want is just to be able to get rid of invalid ones.
Yeah. So I think if you had such a function, I can immediately think of how I would specify such a thing. You know, I could have an info key that told me what I wanted to do. How aggressive do I want to be in pruning these things? You know, and it would end up with, if I called it before I called that function, it might give me, you know, there's 10,000 of these things, and then I'd call this new MPI, you know, prune psets thing, call the get num psets, and it would say there's now 10 left, right? Because that's the ones that are actually valid right now. And the rest were ephemeral and they've gone away, or they're not valid anymore for some reason. That would then get us around this problem, and it would also then mean that I would only ever call that outside of a time when I was trying to iterate through the list, right? So I'd get how many are there, I would do my list which iterated through them, and then I would say prune the list and ask for how many there are again. It allows the user to control when the pruning activity happens. That isn't part of this proposal. I don't want it to be part of this proposal. That's a much bigger change, but I can sort of see how in the future you can add something to this and get around that problem if it turns out to be a problem in the future, which so far nobody's used this at all. So we don't know what future problems are going to be. Are people really going to create, you know, one of these things every microsecond for the next 10 years and run out of you know, of memory space?
I mean, I can think of a use case for it, which is just if you create a process set between every single connect accept, and you're doing some sort of server client thing, you could end up with lots of these.
Yeah. I can think of use cases as well. I can think of, you know, processes coming up and down and fault tolerance replacing them, and all sorts of, you know, fine. I can dream up use cases for this. How big is too big for this list? You know, and so on. What about dynamic naming of these things? There's a whole, you know, there's sessions 2.0, which is going to try and deal with dynamic process sets. And, you know, what does that mean? Does it mean that simply the number of them can vary? Does it mean that the contents of each one can vary? Does it mean, you know, what does it mean? Does it mean that the communicators that I create from them can vary? I don't think so, right? But there's a whole slew of things to do with dynamic processes that we want to avoid in this. This is, you know, version 1 of this, which gives us something that we can work with, something we can start playing with in applications, get some experience and some best practice, and then start noticing, well, actually, there are these limitations. I'd really like it if it didn't do this or it did do that, right? And then we can incorporate that into sessions 2.0, which we're going to aim at MPI 5, I hope, but some years down the line. You know, so this is one of those areas where it's pushing up against that boundary of what should we do in this change and what should we do in future changes. And I think that I would stick with what we've got in terms of semantic, and then add all the dynamic behavior in subsequent changes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that it was on the, on the radar as something that is not going to last forever. So that's fine.
Yeah, I think this semantic, once it goes in, will probably last forever. But I think it can be very easily modified by adding like a prune or a reset function, and that would be the way that you'd want to do it. It's equivalent in C++ to, you get an iterator and that it's valid until you destroy it. If I want to iterate, if the set has changed, the thing I'm iterating has changed, I get another iterator. Well, there's no, currently in MPI, there is no way of getting the second iterator or the subsequent iterator. So that's the thing to be added is to modify my iteration mechanism, take account of recent changes.
And also, to follow up what Ryan was saying, Dan, was when you go back and look at historical discussion of dynamic process sets, they sort of added in a whole separate set of constructs for using an MPI exec type thing, which had something that looked like a process set name, but they actually called it something different, and it had the notion of generations and things.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yep. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we cut out from the original thought processes that led to this proposal. There's a whole slew of things to do with dynamic processes and dynamic process sets, and naming and generation, and all sorts of other stuff. And you're right to bring that up, Howard. There's a lot of thought has happened within the group that generated this proposal, but also actually now in other groups, like Martin's group in TUM is also thinking about dynamic behavior and dynamic process sets and so on, and what does this look like? And I think we need to give those time to mature a bit, and until we can extract some sort of best practice from them. What do we actually want to achieve here? What problem are we trying to solve? And then we can come up with something that actually tries to solve the actual problem rather than just design something in the blind. And I certainly don't want to design it in a week or two before a virtual meeting because we need to get it in by December. That's going to be too rushed to get the right thing. So I want to punt on that if I'm allowed to. I'm getting the sense that this is okay as it stands. There are some concerns about subsequent versions of this. There'll be a sessions 2.0 that will come along. Various people want to see what's in that, but I'm hoping that doesn't compromise this proposal, and that people would still be in favour of voting for this with this wording basically as is.
Before, Dan, I think we need to check, like in the ULFM PR and stuff, if they use any syntax like unreachable due to system faults.
Yeah,
I'm a little nervous about that.
Yes, there's definitely some wordsmithing to do with phrase, the precise form of words to relate, to express the thing that I want to say there. Yes, absolutely. I don't mind about wordsmithing this. That's not really what I'm asking. I'm asking, is this the right semantic being described here? And we can come up with the right form of words for that over the next couple of weeks, and potentially do another virtual meeting where we present different words for the same thing. But what I want to get to today really is this the right concept? Is this going far enough? The comments about dynamic process sets and what happens if there's millions of them or whatever, that's discussing the semantics of what we're trying to describe here. And I think that's what I wanted to get to today was, is this the right semantic to be described? And then we can wordsmith it privately in our working group and whatever, come back with a better form of words. But if we've got the concept wrong, we need to change tax straight away and try and get the concept right. That's what I wanted to get feedback on today. No further objections. I think I'm getting the sense that this is okay and that we should just work on wordsmithing what we've got. That's the piece of information I wanted. So I think now, Wesley, that I'm done. Assuming Wesley's still on the call.
Okay. I thought you had one more.
No, that was the two things I wanted to. I mean, there's a whole bunch of silly, you know, put the macro around MPI things, and we're not going through those today.
Oh, okay. No, yeah, please don't. All right. Well, then, in that case, give me just a second, and I will pull up my info and thing. Just rebuilt the PDF, and I'm trying to figure out where the text is. So folks will need to let me know if this is too big to see. Is that usable? We'll take silence as affirmative. Okay,
I can
so
see it's a PDF, but some of the characters are really quite small. But then that might be just my monitor. I can probably.
yeah. Well, part of the problem is I have a very big monitor that I'm sharing, so
Okay.
I don't know how it shows up on the other people's screen.
That's much better
Is
for
that better?
me. Thanks.
Okay.
It's much better.
All right. So, let me see how far down I go. Okay, so yeah, I've got this advice as well. All right, so this is the text that I read a few times at the last meeting. We went through quite a few iterations of what this looks like, and ended up with this version that has no argc and argv for the language neutral bindings. It does include it for C. It does not include it for Fortran. So just as a reminder for those who were there or for those who weren't, what this function is doing is defining what or how to get an object that looks like MPI info in a situation where you wouldn't otherwise be able to do so. So that could be in sessions like Dan was just describing. That could be before you get to MPI init. That could be, well, actually, before you get to MPI init kind of covers all the other cases, because it would be helpful in that case for error handling and perhaps for tools and for other things. So, so I kind of took the lead on putting this function together, and we've been iterating on it a little bit since then. I don't remember the exact changes I made since the last meeting, but there are a couple of people here who weren't there, and this is very short anyway. I think I'll just read the whole thing and let people give feedback as we go. So, so as I said, we've got the language neutral binding up at the top. So at this point, the only thing that's in the language neutral binding is an info key that you will get out. And this is this mirrors what we have for MPI init, which is kind of what we're aiming for here. So you can use argv and argc if you're in the C bindings, and then if you're in the Fortran bindings where such things don't exist, that's not around. So then the text below, so this routine provides an output object info with the same construction as MPI info and as created during MPI init or MPI init thread with the same arguments passed into this function. This object is not a direct copy or alias of the MPI info env object and could contain different values based on the input arguments and other sources. And the intent there is to say that if you provide argc and argv, that could change the value of the thing that's going to come out of this as compared to MPI info n. For instance, if you provided a different argc and argv, that might give you a different answer. And in the case where those things don't exist, MPI may detect those things in other ways. So it should be the same most of the time, but there are circumstances where you could make it not be the same. So continuing on, multiple calls to this procedure that are given the same input arguments will produce info objects reflecting the current state of the MPI process at the time. Example given, the current working directory. So if you change working directories in between calls to this function, then the value of that key in the MPI info object that comes out of this would change, obviously. The version for ISO-C accepts the argc and argv that are provided by the arguments to main or null. And this is, I believe, the text. That's the same as in MPI init. The user is responsible for freeing the info object via MPI info free. This is a local procedure call. This routine may be called before MPI is initialized and after MPI is finalized. And though I'm not going to bother showing it right now, you can see it on the pull request where I add this function to the list of places where you're allowed to call before and then finalize, after finalize.
So Wesley, is it possible to call MPI info free after MPI is finalized?
I can only assume that, so I'm not trying to tackle the problem of being able to manipulate info objects before and after finalized, because I thought that stuff was in the sessions proposal. Is that not?
It's in a different proposal that, but yes, it's covered in a different ticket. So I think, you know, if everything gets accepted, then info free will be callable outside of you know, when MPI is initialized. But I think in isolation, I think it's difficult to say that MPI info free can be called after finalized.
In isolation, I think this whole ticket would be withdrawn if sessions didn't go in, because the premise discussed in the first sentence doesn't make sense. And the
it does because of
function.
I think it does because of the initial error handlers thing. Your justification to do with the initial and default error handlers works.
Well, yes, but there's no way to manipulate the info object before init. So while I can give you an info object, you can't do anything with it. You can't call MPI info get and all the other things. Okay, so it's dependent on that other ticket. Okay, in which case that's fine, as long as it's clear that this is dependent on that other ticket. Yeah, I mean, it would be a real shame if this couldn't go in, and if sessions didn't go in, and therefore this couldn't go in as well. But I think we would be disappointed about a lot of things, and this may not be the largest of them. Yes, I think I agree. Okay, good. Sorry. No, that's fine. All right, so last thing down here is the advice to users. So in some circumstances, example given when passing 0 to argc and null to argb in C, or in Fortran where such arguments do not exist, the info object may not be populated or may be populated incompletely because this function is local and the implementation may not be able to determine correct values. So while MPI init has the ability to do some communication to figure out what those argc and argv values would be in certain implementations, that's not available in this function because there is no communication. All right, so is that all clear? Can I just point out as a ticket 0 thing that the two nulls in the two different sentences are formatted differently, and just to get the right, or at least consistent LaTeX macro bundle. And I guess the 0 probably needs to be the same font anyway, whatever. I'm sure you can do silly little changes like that. I can do those things. Okay. All right. Well, feel free to ask more questions because I think we've got to fill at least half an hour of time until Marc Andre shows up. Or we can all just hang out on the line for half an hour or so.
I think I'll do half an hour of email if that's okay.
Yep. So, yeah, so Marc Andre sent an email to me at least. I don't know who else. So he said he missed the bus transfer, and so he wouldn't be available at the top of the hour exactly, but he'd be there shortly. I don't know what shortly means, because apparently he lives a long way from anywhere. So he'll be here when he gets here, and I guess if we haven't heard anything from him in half an hour or so, then we'll just hang up, and whoever's listening to the recording afterwards will be very bored. In the meantime, email away. Hey, Marc-Andre, are you ready to go?
Hi. So you're basically through with sessions and everything?
Yep. Yeah, we finished pretty early.
Okay. All right. Well then, let me get things set up. Let's have a basically basing this on the pull request that I've opened for MPIT UIDs via MPIT enum. And the idea is to get feedback on whether that approach is likely to be accepted when it is brought to the plenary, to the forum in December. So let's see. I added okay. I didn't create a PDF yet, but basically the changes should be also readable from the pull request. So let's share the screen. All right. So to get everyone on the same page, the idea has been around for quite some time. I presented a little bit on this in the Barcelona meeting a year ago, and we used some working group time in Zurich now. And the idea is to get some form of global identifier, and I call unique identifier, to most of the named entities in the MPI tool information interface. That is enumeration items. So in the text, I include enumeration items, control and performance variables, and categories, and if loaded into the standard, also events. The idea is that tools have a means to basically query the ID, and the ID is directly connected to specific semantic definition. That means the tool, by checking the name, tool, if it has seen that before, if it knows this ID, it knows the semantics of what's included or how it's supposed to work and how it can be used and processed directly, without having to interpret the description to kind of find out what it does. Yeah? So ideally, for a new, let's say, control variable, the tool developer reads the description or the documentation once, and then implements something that works for that control variable, and can then integrate it into the tool that says, well, okay, this part of my software works with this unique identifier. So the second idea or the second requirement for those unique identifiers is that they're basically globally unique, and it's very easy for vendors to create their own IDs. Yeah, so there shouldn't be any let's say any roadblock to quickly generate those IDs if you're an MPI provider or some other middleware provider. And the initial idea was to have something integer-based, and in the past years, the discussions were going on and off between integer-based and string-based identifiers, with the problems of, or let's say the drawbacks, disadvantages of integer-based schemes is that there currently in the MPI standard there is no precedent for any specific integer value being printed somewhere. Usually even error codes and classes, they have some form of symbolic name attached to it instead of having a specific number. But if we wanted to follow that path of the integer-based UIDs, then we would have at some point define at least parts of a 64-bit integer, if not even a complete 64-bit integer that we would have to print to the standard, which is next to the fact that it's ugly, is also error prone if you have to type in the ID of a 64-bit integer, even if its notation is hex. But so that all basically leads to discussing string-based identifiers, because the string-based identifiers are much easier to handle for developers, for humans who would, initially make this connection between the semantics, or like the description of what this entity is doing, and the code that the human is implementing. But then going initial tries to make this actually with character arrays proved to be quite cumbersome, especially because you could have several of those UIDs attached to a single entity, and how that can happen is that, for example, an MPI implementation chooses to assign a UID from its own namespace to a control variable, and at some point, then MPI chooses to standardize this specific control variable and the semantics attached to it, and for the implementation already having that, they could then use the MPI defined UID and the implementation defined UID next to each other to support older versions of a tool versus newer versions of a tool. The idea is that a specific ID maps onto a specific description, but a specific description can map to several IDs. Yeah. Is that clear for everyone how this relation between UIDs and let's say the semantics or description that I have in mind, how that's going to or supposed to look? No questions? All right. So, or are we again on like the 30 second delay?
I'm sort of thinking, which is, so I should probably say something so you don't move on. It occurred to me as you were beginning to speak that things have moved since you last presented this, and Sessions has now posited the use of URIs and reverse dot notation for two different ways of getting unique things, and that potentially reverse dot notation is a way of getting something or specifying something fairly unique without necessarily having a lot of coordination between individual parties. So potentially,
just to clarify, the reverse dot notation is what like Java uses to for packages, right? Like org.java.something, right?
Yeah. So it could be in this sort of situation. You would start it with Intel being the organization that's producing the, whatever this performance variable is, it's only related to the Intel distribution of MPI or something. So you'd start with Intel or I don't know, something, that's already excludes all of the other vendors, and then, dot something, dot Intel MPI version something or other, and it's already limited to a particular version, dot something else, dot whatever until it's unique, and then it could be as unique as you want. And also there is a way of searching for you could put wildcards in regular expressions and stuff to search for the type of I'm looking for what's the most recent version of the whatever it is variable. I could do regular expressions to search for names and find out there's a whole bunch of possibilities. Have you investigated any of those, or is that? I'm just thinking that there might be a better way of doing it than I know where you're going with this in terms of trying to come up with these unique things. Or at least I remember various options you came up with. We're trying to dole out these things, and who is the arbiter of which one I can use and which one I can't use.
Yeah. So basically, we had like way back, we had the discussions with having the registry and all that, and there was a discussion. Okay, who's being in charge of the registry? What happens if the MPI forum no longer meets this frequently? Who will then take care of the registry, and so on. So the discussion in the working group time in Zurich, the idea was actually to go around to go a similar route, like even the dot notation, reverse dot notation, I threw that into the room as well. My current proposal, but that is I'm open, especially if sessions going for a specific, let's say, string notation, then I'd be happy to adapt in a way to make this not a different way, and like doing something with strings, but that even though they're two different things in MPI, the way to assemble those strings is similar. Yeah? So what I and the idea behind it that people would basically themselves say, well, okay, which is the what I call here the namespace that I use. You could do like com.intel or something, or just Intel or Intel MPI if Intel as I learned, there are like two different groups within Intel doing Intel MPI stuff. So they basically come up with that, and the idea is just as a library provider, you try not to you try to namespace your symbols in a way that you that we have like MPI underscore in front of everything. Like for score P, it's score P underscore in front of everything, just to make sure that we don't name clash. It's all more on let's say on the best effort kind of basis, and basically the reverse dot notation in Java is the same thing. I don't think there's like any legal entity providing or preventing me from writing a package that starts with com.intel.something impersonating that something might come from Intel. It's just that I wouldn't do it, right? So and like to cut the long story short, the idea was that the string identifiers would have three parts, like the unique identifiers, strings as unique identifiers, to have some form of a namespace that could either be just like Intel MPI or the reverse dot notation, whatever. Then have the name of that entity, and then have a version attached to it. And the idea is in the discussion that it always has a version, in a sense that people don't get too attached to the name, because then you would have things like I don't know, eager limit, and you would really like to keep the eager limit name because that is like the perfect name, just like we have MPI send now. Yeah, if we would want to do support both like 32-bit and 64-bit counts, you would probably do something like send 32 and send 64, right? Something like that. But because MPI send was now initially basically chosen as the name, because if you don't want several versions, then that would be a nicer name. But now we have all these sends and the underscore x's, and if we have to fix the x's, it's going to be y or something like that. Yeah. So the idea is you always have something, a suffix to the unique identifier that always tells the version of something, while you can still have the name as a more descriptive thing. So it's like again, I always pick on Intel with this, but if we would have like the description of the eager limit, the initial one that Intel would come up with, we would have like Intel MPI : eager limit : 1. And if then for some reason they think, oh, in the eager limit, because we changed, I don't know, protocols, whatever, now this eager limit thing is actually doing something else underneath. So if you're using this actually the system will behave a little differently. So the semantics change, so they would take Intel MPI eager limit 2 for that description. And then it would be up to Intel whether they want to support the eager limit 1 and eager limit 2 in the same implementation. They could, and a tool could differentiate between the two. Yeah, and of course, all these UIDs, they coexist to the normal names. Yeah, that you would have. Like at the moment, things I think in Intel start with imp underscore something. Yeah. So for the for this example, the name, as there are no restrictions on the name, and I don't want to impose any restrictions on the name, Intel can keep the imp underscore eager limit as the name for what they think should be the prime interface for the eager limit in that implementation. But the tool can then say, well, okay, what is the unique ID of this imp underscore eager limit, and can then say, oh, it's 1, so I take my implementation for 1, or, oh, it's 2, so I take my implementation for 2. Or even it could say, oh, it's 3, I have no clue how to handle 3, and issue a warning or do whatever thing. Yeah, so that's my idea for this three-part ID, string ID, with the namespace kind of playing into this, being like the implementer prefix, playing into the reverse dot notation. Does that kind of explain things, or is that going into the direction that you would like to see it, or do you have any other comments on this?
So I guess I'm not sure. Adding colons into the string just complicates the format. I'm not sure that it's better or than just having reverse dot notation as the format. And I guess it's sort of, if you think there's a different person responsible for different pieces of that unique string, then there's a reason for separating them out.
So I'm typing something like on the top here. So that would be something that you would rather like.
Yeah, and I think as Intel could come up with that string and be reasonably assured that it's unique, or at least nobody else is going to clash with that unless they're deliberately trying to clash with something that Intel should own, right? And if I was trying to do something for an API library that I created at EPCC or whatever, I could do org.epcc and so on, and I'd be reasonably sure that nobody else is going to clash with that because I'm the only person doing API here. It's easy enough to make that unique, and there doesn't really need to be any prior coordination in terms of what should I use for the beginning bit of a string. Which things are allowed, which things are, who gets what. Well, to some extent you can make it up because, well, as long as your company name is unique or whatever, if there's a clash over that, there's going to be some sort of legal battle at some point. But that's nothing to do with MPI. I think I'm not sure that there's any reason to make the format any more complex than an already existing mechanism for generating unique strings, such as the reverse dot notation. That you've written there covers all the bases, I think. Unless you can come up with a convincing argument for separating out, well, this bit's for that and this bit's for something else.
So that is I don't know whether it will convince you, but that would be the question into the group, whether people would rather see a full reverse dot notation or use the three-part thing, because I see it very easily. Like the one that I have now in the top here in the search window, I don't see I can easily tokenize that into the name of the thing. Yeah, I could basically say, well, the version is the last entity separated by a dot, then the name is then separated by another dot, and everything else is the prefix. Right.
So I might choose to, as an organization, follow that sort of format. And my organization is going to be great big chunk of text at the beginning, and then the last two pieces of the, in the dots is going to be some sort of variable name and a version number. Or I might choose to follow any other format that fits the reverse dot notation. I think basically the thing that you really want is that it's unique. How do I guarantee uniqueness? How do I guarantee uniqueness? Well, the same way as I'm going to do so with process set names or whatever the other things in sessions. A way of making it unique, right? As far as the tool is concerned, is it really going to derive semantic information from this is nearly the same, but these characters are different? Right? Is it really going to assume that means it's similar? What does similar mean? It's actually going to use a completely different implementation. It's not going to say, well, it's similar enough, maybe I'll just try this implementation, hopefully that'll work. Right? It's either going to recognize the string or it's not going to recognize the string. If it recognizes it, it can do something with it. Whether it's similar, whether that string is similar to another string is actually irrelevant, right? And so just because a human being will look at it and think those are similar, maybe those mean similar things, right? Well, a human being can read documentation and can make that evaluation. But then a human being would see that string you've got there as very, very similar to have a 2 on the end instead of a 1, or any other variant that looks a bit similar.
Exactly.
Who is your target audience? If you're asking the MPI to make semantic assumptions about strings that are similar to each other, then you need to define a very careful grammar of what is this string actually saying to MPI, and how is MPI supposed to interpret the magnitude of the difference between this and that based on the magnitude of the difference between two strings. I don't think that's what you want. I think that you're just going to say this is different to that.
So actually, you're absolutely right. So I don't want the any technical system to try to infer like semantic meaning from the string itself, because then I could also interpret the description text or whatever. The idea is first and foremost to exactly saying, well, someone looked at this unique ID and implemented this code, and if an implementation returns this ID for something, that should have the exact same behavior as the other thing that it was initially coded for. So,
in which case, I think the format of the string is actually not the important thing here. The important thing is that you specify that it's unique and it stays the same. If I want to say that this behavior is represented by this string, then I always mean that. Whenever I say that string, I mean that behavior, right? That's the key semantic you want to get across. And which naming convention that you impose for making sure that it's unique is actually irrelevant, right? So in which case you have a free choice, in which case I wouldn't choose something complex or new or something you have to define all by yourself. I would just choose one of the existing things. Reverse dot notation is already, defined elsewhere. Just refer to that and say, like's already, why introduce colons and a way of parsing this and adding semantic information that you don't care about? Why tell the user how to create the string other than by suggesting you might want to use dot notation because, that seems okay. Actually, if they choose not to, as long as it's unique, who cares?
Yeah, actually, I see your point. I'm just trying to think about whether it might be a benefit if a tool would encounter like something like this, and it supports just .1, then it could return not oh, here's something that is similar, but I don't really know. It could return, here's a newer version of this, of something that I used to know, kind of. I don't know whether that is
now you are trying to impose
exactly
on the string. So I think you need to decide which one you want. If there is no semantic meaning to the string, then great. It doesn't matter how you've made it unique. If you wish to impose or extract some semantic meaning from the string, then define your grammar. And be very careful about how you define the grammar so that it's machine readable.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that.
Yeah. I think you're right. I'm falling into my own trap because I was saying like, no. I initially I said I don't like strings because people like to attach semantics to it, and now I'm attaching semantics to it because in my initial proposal with basically the 64-bit integer, I didn't have that. I wanted it to be just just a number, just something like with no other attached semantics than it being unique. And you're right. So basically, this could be sufficient, and a newer version could be like this. Yeah, like the other eager limit, or the eager limit that we defined in 2018, or something. Yeah. So and you're totally right. In principle, what the tool needs and what this was designed for in the first place is to make it easier to write robust tools. To say, oh, it's not like this is like the name, so I'll just attach callbacks to this. I want to basically some form of guarantee. Okay, so this is the name. I know the name, and the implementation gives me the guarantee that this is what I expect. Otherwise, it would have a different name or a different unique ID. So yes, okay. So that is something that I'll work on in the previous text. So this whole thing of this, I think it's basically this part, is going to be simplified. I will probably have to or I would like to have something in there, some prefix. So I probably basically go for org MPI forum is reserved namespace. Like if we suggest saying reverse dot notation, then please don't use org forum or org MPI forum or something. And then we'd have to come up with something like that.
Yeah, I think that's probably sensible to reserve some parts of the namespace so that we've got, and that makes it sufficiently unique that it's one of the ones that the MPI forum's defined or something. We can argue about what that reserved name thing is, whether it should be something to do with standard rather than the group, or I don't really know. I don't have any opinion on that just yet, but yes, that seems sensible.
Yeah. Okay. So, any other feedback on this? Any other comments on like the concept so far on what I've presented? All right. So then I'll continue on, and basically the rules that I think the rules are the same that I presented in Barcelona a year back. So the idea is, as a vendor, you can create an ID for like some entity, and so once you, I just read the text. Once a unique ID is assigned to a variable or category, and I have to, that is actually, this is still copy-paste error I have to fix, because now enumeration items and so on are also included here. Once the unique ID is assigned to a variable or category, the type and semantics of that variable or category must not change in the future. That is my idea, that this thing is, once it's defined and a unique ID is assigned, that thing stays. If you, for whatever reason, you need to change something a bit, then you need to assign a new ID, and that's the idea of that the IDs are not heavyweight but rather lightweight, and that's really easy to create a new ID for something. So if the semantics of a given variable or category changes in the future, a new universal ID is assigned to the variable or category with a new semantic. That's what I just said. If changes to the name or description of a variable or category do not change its semantics, the universal ID should be retained. So that is the idea. There was some way back some discussion with Nathan that they were in OpenMPI. They were basically overhauling some like internal components, but the names for variables, they were all attached to they have basically the component they stem from encoded into the name. So if there was some refactoring inside, evidently the names would change. So what this means is if you do something like that and you want to change the name, you can still change the name, but you would retain the universal ID that you assigned. So then the tool, which can also query the name, the aliases, the unique IDs, would then still be able to identify whether it can deal with it and what type of thing it is. So implementations are allowed to use universal IDs of a previously defined variable of the corresponding prefix if the semantics of the variable or category fully match the semantics of the previously defined variable or category, respectively. I think the previously is also something that I have to adapt, have to change that because that's ambiguous. What I mean by that is, for example, in the example that I already had, Intel can use universal IDs of someone else, like the MPI forum, if it guarantees that the semantics are the same, and they don't have to they don't have to fear that something's going to change because the unique IDs they basically they identify a specific behavior, a specific meaning of something. So I think initially implementations will probably just create their own IDs for everything they have, because that's the easiest way to do. But especially for the derived MPIs, for example, you could have something that that an Intel MPI being derived of MPI-CH could have variables of different unique ID prefix. So some would have like org.mpi-ch if we're talking in reverse notation again with something. Those are the ones that Intel just took one to one, and then there were some additional ones or some redefinitions, and those would start with com.intel. And a tool, but the names, that Intel would be free to actually rename the whole set, all with an MP underscore in front of it. Yeah. So for the user, it would be looking like a unified user experience, because it knows all my variables that I might have to specify in a runtime configuration or in my tool startup script have the IMPI prefix, although the definitions initially came from MPI-CH, and the user doesn't really need to know. So that is the intention of this paragraph, that implementations are free to use other implementers' definitions as long as they guarantee that they adhere to that specific definition. So, and the last one, UIDs of control variables, performance variables, and variable categories are independent of each other and do not share a single ID space. Implementation can use the, yeah, okay, oh, yeah, this is basically, yeah, that's another copy-paste error. This is still referring to the 64-bit integer, so I have to adapt that. Adapt or actually remove completely. So those are basically the rules. Yes.
What's the difference between the new unique ID that you're suggesting and the current name field for a control variable, performance variable? There is already a name and there is a description, 2 strings.
Yes.
So it worries me that you were just referring there to a user putting the name into a configuration file. The name is not guaranteed to be unique or the same, or any sort of, no guarantee is given about the name. But you were advocating that they put that into their configuration file such that they're using whatever variable is called that and has a name of that, irrespective of what its user of its unique ID is. Actually, the thing that the user should be putting into their configuration file is precisely the unique ID, because that's the thing that's unique and guaranteed to not change and have the right semantics and so on. It occurs to me that why add a 3rd string to describe these things when you've actually already got 2 of them? You've got a name which you could make the thing that's unique. You could just introduce the idea that the convention is that the name is a unique string, right? And you might want to use reverse dot notation to make that the case. But the name is the thing that's really going to define, as in, if the name is the same, then you may assume that the semantics is the same, because that would be the thing to me that should change.
So there are 2 different audiences for this. So first of all, basically you brought 3 strings into the game, like the name, the description, and the unique ID. The description, I think, is completely separate, because that's basically flow text that describes what this whole thing is about. Yeah.
Agreed. So
basically, it's the name or the unique ID. So the benefits that I see, or also the use case, why a user would like to see using the name, is that, like, the user being like the user of a tool that is basically attaching to the MPI implementation. So if we think MPI advisor, for example, that I think monitors or monitors like a handful, like 2, 3 different control variables, and I think one being whatever form of eager limit. They could say with MP eager limit as the telling the user, well, use MP eager limit, and then internally the tool can have different implementation of the eager limit that it knows about. So, for example, I don't know, Intel 2016 has different definition of this MP eager limit than Intel 2019. The tool can have both implementations. The user says, I want the eager limit because that's, what I'm interested in. That's what the tool says I should monitor. And then the tool can choose, say, well, okay, I'm getting the eager limit here. What's the definition of this? and pick the one from the different versions it supports. Also, the name.
I can see problems with that. I can see problems with that immediately. So I think that the way I would advocate that the user does that is by a regular expression on the unique ID. Right? Anything that has the word or the letters eager in it is maybe the same thing, right? You're trying to extract semantic information from stuff.
No, not at all. No, I'm not saying take anything like the eager limit. So what I'm saying is that, for example, of course, like the vendors are free to change the names between runs. Yeah, they can have names attached to, I don't know, the moon calendar or something. Yeah, but for example, if I want to, if I expose something like the eager limit, yeah, across different implementations, and the user is the user of the tool is having like a job script and basically loading one MPI implementation or loading the other MPI implementation. Now saying they're both Intel, yeah. Sure, all bets are off if you're using different vendors, yeah. But if you have something that works there, then the job scripts wouldn't have to change just because you just loaded a different MPI module.
But the semantics of the things will change. This is not.
Yes, but the tool. That's the thing. The user doesn't necessarily have to know that the semantic change. The tool needs to know.
The user can't guarantee anything. Then I might call something an eager. I might have a name for something that is eager that means nothing to do with anybody else.
Yeah, but I think then we have two different impressions of what a user is. Yeah, if
I'm not sure it matters. I think if I've got two different variables with two different unique IDs, I know that their semantics are different because their unique identifiers are different. Right? If their unique identifiers were the same, then I know from the guarantee of what that means that their semantics are the same. If they have different IDs, I know that they are different. I don't care what the name.
But the thing is, but that is not exactly what I'm trying to advocate, because well, what I'm saying, if the unique ID is different enough, if the unique ID differs, it means for the tool that this thing is different enough that the processing for those two entities, it needs to be different. I can't handle those the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that means that
but those things might still touch the same kind of topic. Yeah. So and the implementation can use basically if we only have the name. Yeah. So first of all, I would say as a tool, yeah, I would make it possible for the user to specify unique IDs if they really want to have unique, like the variable just of that kind. But I would always think that this unique ID is harder to parse than the name that an implementation might expose things. That's the second thing. Now, the first thing is I don't necessarily need to change my 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 JavaScript. And I think there is a valid point in that, we basically, we screwed up in this definition, or we augment, for example, an event type with additional information. And between two versions of an implementation, but I still mean it's the same thing, right? I still mean it's the eager limit. It's just it is handled differently internally, and if the tool knows how it is handled, then I think that is a valid point. And I think you're right that there are some users who basically are so sophisticated that they kind of go into the role of the tool that they that they directly want to have the bare metal information, yeah. But I think there are actually two levels. Thinking of like a very old example, but similar in nature. There was a time where floating point ops. Yeah. Yes, the user would like to have flops, right? So, and let's say the not so informed users might not exactly know whether a certain implementation encoded basically also load stores into that. I think it was at some point like IBM performance counters had load stores as part of the flops, and you kind of needed to do some additional math to come up with whatever what Intel thought what flops were. Yeah. So you could still say, well, give me flops, and then the tool can say, well, which one is it? Is it the one that included the load stores, or is it the one that doesn't? And I'll present the correct number. I'll do the rest under the hood. And I think that is a valid use case.
Yeah. Okay. So I think you are attempting to add on top of the unique IDs give me things that are completely unique and isolated, not similar to each other, cannot be compared. There is no relation between them, right? And then you are imposing onto that sea of different things some sort of categorization, some sort of similarity, some sort of mapping between some name, which then could translate to any one of this set of variables, right? You are imposing semantic information on them and saying, in some way, these are similar, right? They might give me similar information, or I might be able to convert one to the other by doing some sort of trick or something. I think you're attempting to have semantic information without having semantic information. Basically, I think that the name that you're suggesting, the use cases for the name that you're suggesting make it useless. I cannot rely on it. I cannot ask it how many eager things happened, and if it's going to give me different algorithms to compute that, and therefore come up with different numbers, I can't rely on its output because I don't know what it actually did.
Who cannot rely on the output?
Anybody.
The tool, or why?
Because
the tool can say, I always provide this. The tool can always say, I provide this. This is the number you get from. This is the number you get from me, and I take the UID. Why?
Because the thing it's actually caring about is if the unique ID is this one, then I will apply this particular processing algorithm to it, and I will give you this number. I can tell you exactly what the semantic meaning of this variable is, what I did to it, and therefore what the output that I'm giving you means. Right? If the unique ID is something else, then I will apply a different algorithm to it, right? I can tell you again what the semantics are, what the algorithm is, and therefore what the meaning of the thing that I output, right? If I somehow say these two things are equivalent, right, then I don't know, as anything further down the pipeline does not know which choice was made. How is how is MPI, how is anything supposed to determine the difference between those two things? Which variable was actually chosen? Right? So I will still need to say, give me all of the, for this particular name, what does it translate to? Which semantic does it actually translate to? In other words, give me the unique ID that matches this name that I'm giving you. Right? What you're actually asking for is a mapping function, which I give you a name and you give me the unique ID that it maps to on this particular system, or vice versa. You're advocating there is a mapping between these two things. There is a hash map, and I need to inject a name and I get out a unique ID. Once I've got the unique ID, I can then have a guarantee that means something, right? The name means nothing without it being translated to a unique ID that means something. The only meaning that you're attempting to add here is for the unique IDs. You're not making any guarantees about anything else. In which case, right, to me, the name is a second description, right? There is no difference in my mind between the description and the name, other than one is potentially shorter than the other, right? There is no semantic meaning attached. I can't parse the description. I can't parse the name, right? Unless you give me some way of saying these are, categorized to be the same. They are in the same bucket. There is some similarity between these things. There is some conversion between these two things. There's some, why are you naming them the same if they are in fact different, right? If the unique IDs are different, then they are different by your definition of what unique ID means, right? And so why would I then attach the same name to them or the same anything to them? They are different. What is the same about them, right? You're attaching a semantic meaning in terms of giving me some sort of way of saying these are similar in some way. They should be in the same bucket. They should be treated the same way. What do you mean? Right? And I think so far what I've heard is that the name is useless. The thing that I actually care about is the unique ID. If I really care about anything at all, otherwise I might as well just select a random one, right? The first time I ran this, it was in position 3. The next time I'm just going to pick whatever in position 3. It must be similar because it's in the same position as the other one was. It's the same sort of reasoning, right? Because it's got the same name, it must mean something. No, it doesn't. Right? Because you haven't given me any guarantee that the name means anything at all. That it might be different between two different runs. It might be different from minute to minute. It doesn't, unless you attach a semantic meaning and you mandate that it has semantic meaning. It doesn't have a semantic meaning. If you mandate that, then you might as well just say it's the unique ID. There is no difference between them.
Right. Okay. So that basically means the only way to achieve this without going down this route here is to actually impose that names need to be globally unique. So basically merging those two things and instead saying, well, there's something new that's called a unique ID. The existing names need to be unique.
So that's one way of doing it. Yes. You could either impose that the name field, that the values in the name field will always be unique. They, MPI implementations must ensure this somehow, right? And reverse documentation, whatever, fine. Or alternatively, you add a third thing, this unique ID, but you don't make any statements about the name. It's a second description. It's a short description. It has the same.
Yeah, but I'm not doing, but I'm not doing that at the moment. That's the current proposal.
But you have just been saying that name means something. It doesn't mean anything. You shouldn't rely on it.
No. I'm like
you said
currently.
That
I'm not. Yeah. So the thing is, implementations at the moment. Yeah. The status quo is, I have a name into ego limit, and I use it as the ego limit, and in the next version, this same thing is called input ego limit because it's still dealing with the ego limit, but it's now behaving differently. Okay? So
in which case the user doesn't know what's changed. That will just confuse users because so
yes, but that is how it's currently.
That's great.
MPI implementations are doing that. So I'm trying to yes, exactly. That's what I'm trying to fix.
Right.
And
so what worries me is that you said that they should put the name into their configuration file. No, they should not. Once the unique IDs exist, they should put the unique ID into their configuration file because that's the only thing they can guarantee the semantics of. The name doesn't mean anything, right? In the past, it has not meant anything. In the future, it will not mean anything. There is no good reason to put that in a configuration file because you're effectively picking something random, right? And so the statement that you said, the user puts the names into their configuration file and then their script doesn't have to change. Yes, and they will get random answers depending on which MPI library version they pick up. That is a really bad thing. That is the problem that you're trying to fix. Don't advocate that because you're advocating that they fall into the trap that is currently there.
So the thing is, you don't get random answers.
Well, okay.
You don't get because the tool will be able to check which how to process whatever it picks up.
Yes, but that doesn't help. That doesn't help. Right? The tool knows that this is different from previous runs or from future runs or from other runs, right? But that doesn't help because the user is going to say, I asked for eager limit, I got a number. It's probably going to be an eager limit. That doesn't mean anything at all because what is eager limit, right? There is no semantic meaning attached to that name. There never was, and there never will be, right? Because it's just the name. It's just a short description. It doesn't mean anything.
Okay.
Right? Okay. And so relying on it and saying, well, I ran it 3 times and I got the eager limit all 3 times and trying to do anything with those numbers, I can't, they might be a different variable. They might be a different processing algorithm. There is no way of guaranteeing that means anything. And you're just confusing users by imposing that or implying that they might actually mean something. Right?
So we've run over the top of the hour and the audience at this point. So I think we're going to need to cut it off.
Yeah. So thank you everyone, Dan especially for the feedback. I'll if it's all right with you, Dan, I think some more about this and potentially like offline discuss some more on how this can be shaped, and then I'll see how far I get until December. So the feedback that I take home from here is that even like the concept itself is not yet basically thought through enough that it would basically sail through on December, which it would need it. So if we can't basically get to a better definition than what we have for now, it'll probably not be presented at the December meeting then. Okay, so but thanks everyone, and I'll contact you Dan to see if we can save it in any way.
I think my final point would be that the problem is a real one. It needs solving. I can see the basis of a solution here, but it needs to be tighter in terms of exactly what is being specified and what I think there is a good solution here. It just needs the right words around it.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks. So from my side, I'm good. Stop sharing.
All right. Thanks.
Okay,
so
thanks.
then we'll wrap it up.
Oh.
Yep.